what you're doing and how this model representation replaces your numbers. This equals 25. So again, you're using the algae tiles, but this time I laid them out a little bit different. And you have to make sure, I should have used a smaller number here, but we will quickly fill these in. And you know that they're red, so you are actually knowing that they are the positive version of your algebra tile units. And from there, that's when you divide them up visually, so you can solve your question. I'll just quickly fill these in so that you know that they're not empty. And then you equally divide them up. Okay, so I'm going to shade these units in so that they represent the positive and not the negative units. And here you now have 25 units, which is representative of your numerical value on your equal sign up here, your 5y positives on this side. And to show your answer, you are going to visually draw imaginary little lines in here to group them into groupings of 5. And as you see, once you do this, you can isolate one of those y's, and one of y is equal to 5 units, and that's exactly confirms your answer. Okay, so we're starting to work with fractions now. So this is solving linear equations, single step with fractions. Now again, a reminder that on a single step you are either multiplying or dividing, and the opposite of each of those operations is vice versa. So if I'm multiplying, opposite is dividing, opposite of dividing is multiplying. So don't panic now that we're into fractions. We'll work this through, and so hopefully you feel comfortable with this. Now, 2x equals 3/4. First of all, you have to isolate your variable, and to do that, this tells you to multiply. So the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So you're going to divide 2x by 2, but what we do on one side, we do on the other. This zeroes this out, so you are left with x equaling, yes, 3/4 over 2. Now, this really means, and I'm going to extend this down or maybe over here a bit, this really means 3/4 divided by 2. And as you know, you can put 1 underneath here. It still represents and means the same thing. Now, how do I solve for a division problem? You have to change it to multiplying and do the inverse of the second fraction. So then this becomes 3/4 times 1 over 2. So hopefully I haven't lost you yet. We'll talk this through again. And that in turn equals 3 times 1 is 3, 4 times 2 is 8. So your answer here is 3/8. So x equals 3/8. Now we're going to take our 3/8, because we found out that x equals 3/8, and put it back into the original question to make sure that that is the correct answer. So we're going to take, we said it's 2x, so 2 times 3/8 equals 3/4. Now, again, you know that 2 over 1, it means the same thing, so we can do 2 over 1 times 3/8, and that equals 6/8. And if you reduce these fractions, what you look for a common denominator. What goes into 6? It also goes into 8, which is 2. So 2 into 6 goes 3. 2 into 8 goes 4. And your 3/4 equals your 3/4. Okay, we're solving linear equations with fractions. And this particular one, I've used m as the variable now for just to throw in another letter. We're looking at m over 3, which is a division. The opposite of division is multiplication. So we are moving into 3 times using the same number that's given, so we can zero it out. multiply one side, we have to do the same on the other side. So we're multiplying this by 3. This cancels this out. We are left with m on one side. Here we put that imaginary 1 underneath that is understood, all right? And then you'll notice this is a negative symbol, so we have negative 2/5. Don't let that throw you. You work it through the same way. 2 times 3 is 6. 5 times 1 is 5. But now it could be written as negative 6/5. It could be written as negative 6/5. Or we can rewrite it another way as this is an improper fraction. We can write it as 5 goes into 6, 1 whole plus 1/5 more. And again, it's negative 1 1/5. So now, how do we check to see if what we worked out is correct? So we come back over to our original question here. Let's use our 6/5 to make it a little bit back easier. It is negative 6/5 over 3 equals negative 2/5. Now this probably looks like a whole big conglomeration of numbers, but don't let that panic you, all right, when we're checking. This really tells you to divide. So let's take this one side only and work it through here. So this really says negative 6/5 divided by 3. Well, division questions, we can change and put this 1 underneath so that we know what that represents. It's understood. And now I'm going to rewrite it again because a division question in fractions becomes a inverse multiplication question. So now you're changing it to multiplying and you change it to 1/3. You have to inverse your second fraction. So now we can multiply across. 6 times 1 is 6. 5 times 3 is 15. And we have our negative. Again, look for a common denominator. What goes into 6 that also goes into 15? Well, 3 does. 6 divided by 3 is 2. And it becomes negative 2. 3 goes into 15, 5. And there's your answer, negative 2/5, and it is exactly the same as that, so you absolutely know that your check is correct. Okay, we are working with solving linear equations with decimals. So we've talked about solving linear equations single step. It's still single step, but we've done whole numbers. Then we moved to fractions, and now we're taking a look at decimals. Again, a reminder that the opposite of multiplying is dividing. The opposite of dividing is multiplying. And you're thinking those scales, what will you do on one side of this equal sign, you always do on the other. So we'll take a look at this again. This tells you to multiply. The opposite of multiplying is division. And therefore, we're going to take this negative 1.2. And again, I'll draw your attention to the negative. You have to include, if you see the negative symbol and it is a negative number with that variable, you have to create and keep it as that negative. So this is negative 1.2, and what you do on one side, you are going to do on the opposite side. So now you have negative 1.2 there. This cancels each other out, as I call it, zeroing it out, and you're left with x. And use your calculator. And if you have a calculator with that negative, it's got a negative and a plus symbol on it, that's what you need. You put in 3.96, press your negative button, divide 1.2, press your negative button, and then you should end up with negative, just double check here, 3.3. So a negative divided by a negative will give you a positive. And now if we take this number and we have to put it back into our original question again for a check, because you can always double check and make sure your answers are correct. So now we have negative 1.2, multiply your 3.3, that is equal to negative 3.96. 96. And if you do your multiplication, you will end up with negative 3.96 equals negative 3.96. So you know for sure that what you figured out right here for an answer for x is correct when you insert it back into the original question again. Okay, so that we carry on, not only do you want to be able to solve linear equations mathematically with pencil and paper, but you want to be able to show a model or represent that linear equation with a model. So I want you to draw your attention to this poster on LG tiles. It will always be up in the classroom. You'll always have it as a reminder, just to remind you of what's positive, what's negative. So when you're looking at these very large tiles, you know that it is square rooting. It's square rooting the unknown variable of x. When you're taking a look at these small tiles, you will notice there's red and there's white. Well, the red is always your positive, your negative is always your white. When you're looking at these longer algebra tiles, you will also have, but they're green and white. And one again is positive and one is negative. So if you remember, always your negatives are white, your colors are always your positive numbers. So take a look at what I put out here. This, if you had to represent, you have 2, and if you want to look up here again, remember it can be x, it can be y, it can be s, it can be any unknown variable, any letter representing it. So you have 2, you can represent it by a number of 2x. Then, why did I put a negative here and not a plus sign? Well, these are white. White represent negative, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these. So you have a negative 6. And now, if you want to solve for that 2x equals, you have to then do the reverse number. Okay, let's tie together the solving of linear equations. Step 1, Step 2, and Step 3 with the distributive property. If you take a look at Step 1, this either involves multiplication or it involves division. Your second step, when you get into this process, will have 2 steps. The first one being either addition or subtraction to zero out your number. And then from there, your next step is to go back to step 1, your multiplication or division. And then when you jump to the third step, you're doing the distributive property. Your first step is distribution, which is your multiplying process. Your second step, when you're doing this process, is to go back here. You're going to be either adding or subtracting. And then your final process, again, is what you did in step 1. You're multiplying or dividing. So you're tying all 3 together. You're not doing anything that you haven't been able to do in previous years. And use your calculator, think of BEDMAS operations, think of your positive, negative integers in your number line, and just work it through, looking for common denominators for fractions, and hopefully you will have success solving linear equations.
All right, we're moving into actual mathematically solving the linear equations, and then there's a process of checking to make sure that you have your